I just wanted to start by saying that I watched both Seoul and Miami, and they're very good, and your work is amazing.
Why are you like this?
Who am I? Who do people see me as? Am I the expectations people have for me? The ones that make me feel so fragile that the wind could easily blow me away?
Today started out as the best day of my life. Yes! Woohoo! I did it! I got the gig! Ah! Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Help! I'm not done! Oh my goodness!
Well, this is off to a hopping start.
You all are a bright and shining future. You need to understand what is at stake here.
Everything's not so black and white like you make it out to be.
But we are fighting for our lives.
Can you kind of explain your background and how you got to where you are now and, your life story?
That's big. That's a complicated story. Well, being a filmmaker, a screenwriter, and a filmmaker, this is actually my second career. I was a journalist for almost 2 decades, about 17 years, before I even started dabbling in what I do now. When I went into college, I didn't even study journalism. I just was studying English. But I've always really been attracted to storytelling. I kind of expected to be a journalist my entire life. That I never really had an expectation to move into filmmaking. I always wrote creatively as a hobby, even going back to college. At the same time I was writing for my school paper, I was also publishing independent comic books with some friends of mine. So I've always written creatively, but I always just did it for fun. It honestly was not something that I've ever believed could turn into a career for me. It's interesting that just about in like 2012 or so, 2013, when my journalism career was starting to wind down, I was just then getting very, very serious about my creative writing career.
How did you get into playwriting?
I joined a very small independent theater company here in Los Angeles and started just writing short plays. They do short play festivals. And I was one of those, new writers who would you give me a prompt, I go home, I write all night, I come in the next day with a 10-minute play and the actors come and perform it. And you do those, and the short plays, 24-hour plays turn into short plays turn into full-length plays. One Night in Miami was actually my first produced play, and that was produced in 2013. That coincided with my last journalism job because there was so much interest in the play. It really got my playwriting career started. And in addition to my playwriting career, because I happened to be living in Los Angeles, there were also opportunities to write for film and television. And then it was right around 2018 when I got a call from Pixar. They were actually looking for a new writer on a film that they were working on. And I was a longtime fan of Pixar. So when I went up to Northern California and met with them, I fell in love with the story and just decided I have to be the guy to help, tell this story. And by this time, I'd also adapted my play One Night in Miami into a screenplay. So I finished that screenplay and left to go to Northern California to work at Pixar. And I ended up, what was supposed to be 12 weeks ended up being over 2 years of my life, writing and then co-directing Soul. In addition to that, One Night in Miami found a director in Regina King, so that I ended up actually working on both films at the same time. So it was pretty crazy. It was a pretty crazy couple of years when I was really off the grid.
Let's talk about One Night in Miami. So is there a specific reason why you chose to write it as a play first?
Well, yeah, because it was a real night. It really happened. And when obviously that all happened way before I was born in the 60s. I was born in the 70s. And but at the time that I found out that this was a real night, those 4 men were basically heroes of mine. So, there were 4 of my heroes that I didn't really realize were friends like that and hanging out. So it was kind of an exciting idea to imagine considering their very different personal politics, how 4 people like that might challenge themselves and, and have a conversation, just the same types of conversations I had with my friends when I was younger, conversations about being Black men in America. How do we move forward? How do we succeed? What is our social responsibility if we do succeed? These are questions that they were things we talked about. And I wanted to kind of have that conversation using these characterizations of these very famous men.
Congratulations on your awards, like your nominations for your awards. That's super cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. How does it feel being nominated for so much stuff?
It's a little bit weird, I guess, surreal, because, these projects take years, and when you're working on it, you're never working on it with the expectation or intention of any awards. You just want to make sure it gets out there and people actually get to see it, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the filmmaking process. So I just felt crazy lucky that both of them actually came out in the same year, let alone thinking about awards. So it's pretty surreal.
What was it like getting to collaborate with someone else like Regina King on the movie? And I guess because you co-directed Soul, so as the screenwriter, what did you get to do in the process of making One Night in Miami?
Well, the great thing was, in addition to being the screenwriter of One Night in Miami, I was also an executive producer. So by being an executive producer, I was able to have way more involvement than just the script. So again, it was wonderful to collaborate with Regina King because she was amazing, but that meant I got to be around for everything from the casting. So I was there for auditions and help be a part of selecting the cast for the film, to being on set on location, both in New Orleans and other parts of Louisiana and back in Los Angeles in the making of it. So, in giving input on everything. I really liked having that additional opportunity as an executive producer with my fellow producers to kind of continue the collaboration. It wasn't a situation where I just handed over the script and said, okay, see you guys later, call me when the movie's done. I had to be there and be a part of the process of actually making the movie. But a lot of it is just answering people's questions, because there's going to be a million questions that come up. There's questions that come up on set when you're shooting scenes. The actors might not understand a line, and it's like, well, what did you mean when you wrote this? And it's like, Kemp, and I'm over there, and it's like, yeah, I'm here. And then you just have further conversations, and some of the things you wrote right in the script, you get to set, and it turns out you can't do it that way. So you have to kind of reimagine it on the scene, and based on the parameters of the location parameters of the set and all of that stuff on the fly. So it was a really fun process, and it was great to be working with someone like Regina, who, she's so smart. Even though this was her first film, she's been on film sets her whole life for over 30 years. So, it really felt like we were in good hands, the whole team.
So do you want to talk about a little bit what the process was working on Soul and getting to work at Pixar?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Pixar, people know a lot about their process, the Pixar process, which is really collaborative. You know what I mean? Like filmmaking, screenwriting can be a very lonely profession. You spend writing One Night in Miami was something where I spent long hours by myself in a room alone, just like working for weeks and then months at a time. Pixar is like the opposite. It's almost like every idea in your head you talk about with a big group of people, and ideas can come from anywhere. It's unusual in that, like, even though I came on as a screenwriter, the writing of an actual Pixar film isn't just done by the writers, it's also done by the story artists, because animated films are storyboarded, and the story team pretty much has very similar responsibilities to a writer, only they're writing, so to speak, visually through their drawings. And that collaboration, it never, ever stops. So, I mean, that element of it, at times it makes it sometimes exhausting, but it also makes it kind of exhilarating, because you feel like the best ideas are the ones that end up in the film.
Would you say that you prefer working alone or like as a group? Is there one that you would rather do?
It depends. It depends on the situation. There are definitely times where I would much rather just be by myself and just work alone and be left alone. But there are other times where I do enjoy working with more of a group. It really depends on the situation and the type of story that I'm trying to tell. Working on One Night in Miami was a lot different. I mean, it was based on a play that was my play. You know what I mean? It was like my little world that I created. But again, that's a very different type of movie. I mean, most of it takes place in one room. So it was very different experience.
Was it hard for you to kind of turn your, like, I guess, baby, the play, into something that includes so many other people, like, as a
Yeah,
film?
it can be hard for some people, but because I used to be a journalist, I'm not that precious about stuff. I'm used to having an editor who will come in and mess with stuff all. So I'm not very precious about my writing. I know some people, I have friends who do what I do, who are incredibly sensitive about their writing and precious about it. But I've always kind of understood that, cinema is just a different medium than theater, plain and simple. So you have to try to be willing to have your work reimagined for that medium. So I wasn't precious at all, actually. I was happy to throw out things that didn't work, rewrite things, tell a different story, which I pretty much did for the film version.
So going back to your career as a journalist, do you
Mhm.
think that being a journalist has informed your writing or your storytelling in a different way than someone who studied or did something else?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the word that I use, my journalism was reporting. Reporting and research are the same thing. It's going out into the world, interviewing people, digging up files. It's learning about a subject. And when you're writing creatively, research should be a huge part of your process as well. I think sometimes people think because if you're working on something that's a work of fiction and you're making it up, that there's no need for research. But of course there is. You could be doing something that all takes place in a garden, and that takes research. You should be going out, visiting gardens, taking pictures of plants. There's this element of research that should go into every single thing you do. And I think sometimes writers, because they're so excited to just get to writing the fun dialogue and writing the scenarios, want to skip that process. But because I was a journalist, not only do I not want to skip that process, the research for me is actually one of the most exciting parts of the process. I spend more time researching and then outlining my stories than I do actually writing the script, which is a little bit unusual for writers. And that's just because I'd rather have an abundance of too much stuff than not enough. I'd rather be whittling down ideas rather than struggling to find one. And the more research I do, the more I get out into the world, the more people I speak to, the greater abundance of ideas I have.
For One Night in Miami and Soul, um, how was the research process different for each movie? Because, or play and screenplay, because they're so different, they're so opposite.
Obviously, One Night in Miami is historical. So a lot of that research is research into history, and that involved a lot of times, not just interviewing people, but spending a lot of time, honestly, in libraries, digging up documents and in archives, video archives. For Soul, because it was set in New York City, I think a lot of the research was about just being in New York, because again, Pixar's in California. I'm pretty familiar with the city because I'm from there, but a lot of the story artists aren't. But the thing that's important to understand is that unlike live action, in animation, there's nothing you see that isn't supposed to be there. You know what I mean? Like if there's a crumpled piece of paper, that means a story artist had to draw it, an animator had to animate it, and it had to be rendered. So nothing happens in animation by mistake. So in order to make it accurate, you have to capture every piece of gum on the sidewalk and then recreate that. So it was very, very different research process because animation has a whole different set of demands in order to be accurate.
So for Soul, can you explain a little bit why the message of Soul, or is it important to you? And if it is, why?
Yeah, it's really important to me, because I feel like, um, unfortunately, I think in our society, we have a tendency to kind of say that everyone is either a winner or a loser. And in order to be a winner, you basically have to like almost win the lottery in terms of how much success you need to have in order to be a winner. And we really wanted to tell a story that reminded people that everyone's lives have value. There's a certain kind of film that we used to enjoy growing up. And a great example of it would be a film like It's a Wonderful Life, or A Christmas Carol, the story of Scrooge. These are classics for a reason because they're very earnest and they talk about the things that are important in life. And we wanted to do a movie that kind of reinforced that.
I think that's like a really important message, especially for younger filmmakers or just younger people trying to chase their dreams. That like, your accomplishments don't define you. You're more than
No,
that.
not at
Um,
all.
what would you say is your favorite part of like writing and directing and everything that you do?
There's something kind of awesome about coming into a project, often as strangers, and leaving the project years later as like close friends, and getting to really create something with other very talented, very creative people. That's almost like I've always said that's my mantra, like make dope stuff with cool people. Like that's the dream. That's all I ever want to do is continue making dope stuff with really, really cool people. And that's my favorite part of it.
I guess the flip side, what would you say is your least favorite part?
Oh, how long everything takes. I mean, as much as I love animation, there's only so many more animated films I can do because animation takes so long. An animated feature takes between 4 and 7 years from concept to delivery, and it just I love doing animation and as a medium, but it takes so long, and you're so exhausted. By the time you get to the finish line, you're just like you feel like you're dying. You're like, oh man, I can't believe we. And then you see it, and you're like, oh, that was everyone's happy. Oh, that was so great, but they haven't. It takes so long. That's my least favorite part.
You would say it's worth it then, right?
It is worth it. It's absolutely worth it. But I can't. Like I'm working on another animated film right now, and it comes out in 2022, the end of 2022. But like after that, I'm gonna probably have to take a little break from animation for a little while, only because again, it takes up a lot of time and it's so slow. So in order to have time to do things in live action, I have to kind of step away from that. So again, it's one of those things that I wish it weren't so all encompassing and ran for so long, but that's just the process.
Do you have a message or like something you would say to the younger generation of filmmakers, I guess, relating to what you just talked about?
Well, in order to make something really good, to tell a story really well, you first have to do it really poorly. That's the thing, is like no matter how talented and smart you are, don't expect the first draft, the first version to be perfect, because it never is. It never ever is. The first draft I wrote of One Night in Miami was so bad, in fact, I almost didn't go back to it. I almost like walked away. It was terrible, so awful. And the Pixar process of making films, we literally make dozens and dozens of awful versions of the movie in order to get to the good version that we actually end up animating. So contrary to the belief that it's just like this spark of genius and it just comes out. Yeah, the idea feels like a spark and you go, yeah, that's a great idea. That's going to be dope. But then when you get into making it, oh man, you do so much garbage first. And that's okay. Like that's part doing versions that disappoint you, that aren't up to your expectations. That's actually part of the process. And it's part of the development in order to get to the thing that you're happy with. The best advice I can give is that if you really are passionate about it, the one virtue you need to develop is perseverance, because you can be excited and you can be talented, you can be lucky, and you can be all those things, but you still might not hit when you want to. But if you have perseverance and you really believe in it, it's really fun doing what I do. There's something uniquely gratifying about being able to create and share these stories with the world. But again, perseverance is the one thing I would really encourage.